All right, this is Mr. Harmless. I'm doing geometry and construction. This is Unit 3. We're just starting off Unit 3. And right at the very beginning of Unit 3, you're going to be introduced to something you've never seen before, most likely. And, well, it's called trigonometry. Okay. Now, in order to do trigonometry, there's some basic ideas that you need to understand. Here's the first one. You need to know what a right triangle is. Okay, I know that you know what a right triangle is. It's a triangle that has at least one right angle, and you can only have one right angle in a triangle. In this triangle, we always call the side that is opposite the right angle the hypotenuse. Okay, abbreviated HYP. Now, in trigonometry, we're going to always be dealing with these two other angles, right? We have the right angle, but there's these two other angles, okay? Now, if you were right here, so put yourself in this triangle. Let's say you are right here, and I'm going to put a little arc where you're at. So from the perspective of this angle, now this is the hypotenuse. But if you were looking over here at the other side of this triangle, we would call this side right here the opposite leg. Okay, because these are the legs of a right triangle. Now, if you were right here, if that's the opposite leg, the leg that would be right next to you would be called the adjacent leg. So the math terms are leg, leg, hypotenuse for the right triangle. Regular old English words like opposite and adjacent. Adjacent means right next to you. Opposite means, well, opposite. I hope you know what that means. But if you're here, this is the opposite leg. This is the adjacent leg. Now, if I had this exact same triangle and the hypotenuse is here, if you instead were right here, notice now the opposite leg wouldn't be this leg, right? If you're right here, the opposite leg would be over here. And this leg right here would be the adjacent leg. I'll abbreviate this time. So that's the first thing you need to be able to do, is from one of these angles, identify what's the opposite, what's the adjacent, and what's the hypotenuse. Okay, that wasn't too complicated now, was it? Let's move on to the next little idea that we're going to deal with, okay? So the next thing we're going to deal with, and I'm going to give you the most very basic concept here, okay? There are three trig functions that you're going to need to know for now. Three trigonometry functions. Okay, three trig functions. One is called the sine function, and it's spelled S-I-N-E. The second one is called the cosine function, and the third one is called the tangent function. Sine, cosine, and tangent. Sine will be abbreviated S-I-N. Cosine will be abbreviated C-O-S, and tangent will be abbreviated T-A-N. And if you look on your calculator, you will see there's a button that looks like this, a button that looks like this, and a button that looks like this. Okay? Now you're going to need to know what these three trig functions represent. The sine function represents the opposite leg over the hypotenuse. The cosine function represents the adjacent leg over the hypotenuse. And the tangent function represents the opposite leg over the adjacent leg. Now, math teachers, since before my time, were giving us a little way to remember this, to remember sine, cosine, and tangent. And the way that they would remember this is by telling us this. So, ka, toa. This is not some official math thing. This is just a way to remember these three functions. Sine, right? S for sine. opposite, hypotenuse. Cosine, adjacent, hypotenuse, tangent, opposite, and adjacent. All right, now we haven't barely scratched the surface here, but I'm going to give you some real basic way that this works. Now, while we're in class, we'll talk about why this works and how this works, but let me just give you the basics of uh, how this works as far as doing an actual problem, okay? Let's go to a new slide here. Let's say you have a triangle. And let's say you know the height of this triangle right here is, let's say, 10 meters. And let's say that you know that this hypotenuse right here is 22 meters. And let's say somebody goes, well, if this is true, what is this angle that's right here? That's a degree symbol, x degrees. What's the degrees of this angle? Now, so far, you have not had a way to figure this out. But with trig functions, we could figure out what this actual angle actually is. Okay, now, so let's take what we learned in the first part. From this angle right here, I could identify this right here as the opposite leg. It's opposite in the triangle for where this is at. Now, this is right next to this x, but it's not a leg, so it's called the hypotenuse. And that's because it's opposite the right angle. The right angle is exactly opposite to where it's at. So this is the opposite leg. This is the hypotenuse. So all I've done so far in this problem, if I say find this angle, all I did first was figure out what numbers I have in my picture. Now, I'm going to use my little memory thing here. Okay, my mind goes, okay. So, ka, toa. Sine is opposite in hypotenuse. Cosine is adjacent in hypotenuse. Tangent is opposite and adjacent. What do we have? Opposite and hypotenuse. So it can't be cosine or tangent because those need the, this one has adjacent and hypotenuse. This is opposite and adjacent. The only one that has opposite and hypotenuse is this one. So that means I'm going to write down, I'm going to abbreviate it, sine. Okay. So I know I'm using this trig function. Now, so far, all we've done is dealt with the first two things that we talked about. Now, talking about how to set up an equation. When you use a trig function, you always put the trig function name first. Right next to it, right here, you're going to put the angle. And right now, that's the thing that we don't know, x. Next, you're always going to put the equal sign. And then next, you're going to put, now what did we say? Sine was the opposite, and well, let's see here, let's go back. Sine opposite over hypotenuse. So the opposite, in this case, the number 10, right? So the opposite and the hypotenuse, since it's sine. What is the hypotenuse? 22. All right, so we have the sine of the angle equals the opposite over the hypotenuse. Now I know what you're thinking. That didn't help me at all. Okay, so let's talk about this. How do we use our calculator to solve this? And I don't know if my calculator will show up here on my screen, but I sure hope it does. I don't think it's going to. Ah, that's too bad. All right. The sine, now if you look on your calculator, there's a sine button. If you look right above that sine button, you'll see this, sine -1. Okay? So here's what you're going to hit on your calculator. And I need to grab my calculator, even though you can't see it. I apologize for that. And we're going to do the second button and then the sine button. And on your calculator, you're going to see this. Then you're going to click on these two numbers, 10 divided by 22. So when you type that in, 10 divided by, looks like that, 22. You're going to close it up, and then you're going to hit equals. So 10, and you should get 27.0356917.9. Okay? Here's what this means. This is the angle right here, and we're going to round it off. 27.035, we're just going to round it up to 27 degrees. 27 degrees. That was tough, wasn't it? All right, here's what I'd like you to do. Now, I can help you in class. I can also help you online. If you have questions, you can send them to me. But I'd like you to try problems number 1 through 7. The first question you should be able to do from previous learning, but then you have several trig questions all in a row. See if you can figure those out. If you can't, I'd be more than happy to help you later.